Hello and welcome to the channel. Recently, I taught a couple classes on macro photography and focus stacking. And one of the things I talked about is usually when we talk about macro, we're talking about close-up photography. But when we look at the true definition of macro, it's a one-to-one representation of the subject matter on the medium is being captured on, which in the case of a mirrorless full-frame camera, it's the same size as a frame of 35 millimeter film, so pretty tiny. And I thought it would be kind of interesting to just walk through the process of capturing a true one-to-one macro. So I was looking for an interesting macro subject. I came across this old lens in a drawer. This was a lens I bought back, I think 1984, 1985. Somewhere in that time frame, from a company called Service Merchandise, or a catalog sales company. I believe this was their store brand, Albanar. This was a lens made for Nikon SLRs, and admittedly, pretty inexpensive lens. Optics aren't very good, but at the time it was what I could afford, and actually used it quite a bit back then. So I wanted to do as close to a true one-to-one macro as I could. So the way you do that is you actually manually set the lens. In this case, I'm using the 105 f-mount macro Nikon lens. Set it to one-to-one, and then you move either the camera or the subject to get focus. In this case, I'm using a focus rail, and that's allowing me to just make little adjustments back and forth just to try to bring it into focus. The one challenge I have is I am on carpet, so as I turn the knob to move the camera, it does shake a little bit. So it does change things, makes it a little bit challenging. But ideally, I'd like to have everything in focus. And in order to do that, I need to do something called focus stacking. Focus stacking will basically take it all the way around the edges of this. So I'm going to just pull the camera back a little bit, and you'll notice it does wiggle just a touch. I'm going in the wrong direction, so let's go back. But you can see how the focus changes as I come around. And I really want to look at that lower left-hand corner and get that. I'm using the Nikon Tether software, my Nikon Z9. The interesting thing is, if you are a Nikon mirrorless shooter and you're shooting tethered, the focus stacking doesn't work with the 7.2 or the 6.2 or the 7 or the 6. There's probably other ones as well. Those are just ones that I'm aware of. For some reason, it's not enabled, which is a little bit annoying. You would think that since this is Nikon software, they certainly could have gotten that part correct. So now that I have this set up, I'm going to go and select focus shift, and I have the number of shots set to 100. So this requires a little bit of setup on the camera. And so first thing I do is I go to focus shift shooting, and when I go in there, I can go to the number of shots and set that to 100. And I can actually go, I believe, up to 300 is the max. And you just go through. Once you have that set, then you go and identify the focus step width. And I'm going to go with 1 on here, but you can go anywhere from 1 to 10. What that means, I'm not quite sure. It's just a narrower selection. And then the interval until the next shot. Some of the other things on there we're not going to worry about. And of course, your camera will be different as well. And then once you have that set, then we're ready to go on to the next step, which I'm going to launch from the Tether software. So let's go ahead and start this, and you'll actually see the focus change as it's taking the different shots. Okay, so now we have our 100 shots, and we can see that we did go all the way across the front to even where part of the 8 is sticking through, and that looks to be nice and sharp as well. So the next step is to take this into Photoshop and start to combine these images. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so I have my photos in Lightroom, and I really don't want to do much to them right now. As I look at the histogram, I can see that I did really the best I could just given the range, but it looks like nothing is blocked out, nothing is blown out, so I should be able to recover any highlights and shadows that I have in here after I do the merge. So what I want to do is I want to select the first image, go all the way to the end, and select, holding down the Shift key, so I have all of the images selected. I'm now going to go in and go down to Edit In, and then Open as Layers in Photoshop. So at this point I have all of my photos loaded into Photoshop, and I'm going to go and make sure I have them all selected. So scroll all the way down to the bottom, that Shift key, and there's a couple of steps. This is actually quite an easy process. If I go to the Edit menu, I see the Auto Align Layers and Auto Blend Layers. I'm going to actually do both. Even though I was on a tripod, as I mentioned earlier, I was on a carpet, so it's possible things might have gotten bumped. So this is just going to go through and just make sure everything is aligned properly. So let's go ahead and do that, and this will probably take a little bit of time because there are a lot of very large photos in here. And it's just looking at the content and just figuring out what we'll see at the end is probably just a little bit around the edges of area that just doesn't have any data. So we'll see that little checkerboard thing possibly. So now that it's finished, we can see that so it was a good thing we did it. Looked like there was a little bit of a shift there so you could see around the edges. But now that we have that, now we can just go back to the Edit and do Auto Blend Layers, just keeping the defaults. And now it's going to go through, look at all of the various layers, and based upon edges, determine what the sharpest parts are within the photo. And typically what happens is along the edges, you can see down here where we have some kind of strange thing. So our photo is going to actually start here. It's going to probably end somewhere in this area right here, which is perfect actually, because I didn't really want any of that, and I didn't really want any of that down there. So I think that will work out to be just about right. Now sometimes Photoshop does give some unwanted artifacts when it goes through and does the blending. That could require a little bit of additional work afterwards, and sometimes it's just a little bit too much. So that's when I will use a different application. Typically Helicon Focus, it lets you select the algorithms, does a little bit nicer job. So we'll see what Photoshop does, and depending upon the results, we may decide to go and use a different application. So now it's finishing up. It's doing a little bit of fine-tuning. You can see that it's doing something called trim. So basically eliminating all of those areas outside of where there's data up there. And we can see everything now is nice and sharp. As I mentioned, you are going to have those blurs towards the edge just because of how it works, but it actually looks like it did a pretty good job. And I think as I look at this, as I look at this area here, I get a little bit of fall off, which is to be expected. I think this is something that I can work with. So let's bring this back into Photoshop. But before we do this, we have to eliminate all of the original layers. Reason being, it's just too big of a file to save. The operating system just doesn't support it. But you'll notice it did make a new layer at the very top that is the merged photo. So just come down here, hold down Shift, select that, just drag those all into the trash can, and I'm just left with my final merged image. So I will go ahead and save that. I'll save. I could have just done Command S as well. And now if I come back into Lightroom, I will see that image show up. So now we can go through and edit this like any other photo. So let's go ahead and just see what we want to do. So blacks are probably good. It says we have a little bit, and that's going to be cropped out anyway. So I'm going to actually do my crop first. And I think I'll stick to the original aspect ratio. So I'll come in above there. And I think I'll come up like this. And maybe just come down. But I think I want to have kind of that arc right there. So let's just come in just a little bit tighter there. And I think I want to have the top of the lens. So I think I want to have something that looks kind of like that. Don't mind the fade off and depth of field there. I think that looks pretty good. So we'll go ahead and crop that. And now we can start to adjust this. So I look at just a little bit that's pure black. So I think I will leave that alone. So a little bit that's blown out. But I'm not going to worry too much about the background being blown out. So I think I will bring up the whites a little bit. Definitely going to bring up the shadows quite a bit. That's going to definitely give me a lot more detail in there. And maybe just drop the highlights down. And I think that looks pretty good actually. Maybe toss in just a little bit of contrast. Maybe just bump the exposure up just slightly, not much. So like maybe just a quarter of a stop. And I'd like to get those reds maybe just a little bit more intense. But I'm first going to play just a little bit with contrast just by adding a little bit of dehaze in there. And it's kind of interesting, the dust in there that was on there. As I mentioned, this was in a drawer. Just going to add a little bit of vibrance, but I think I'm going to actually use the color point tool and just click right in on that red. And I think I'm just going to exaggerate saturation on that a little bit. Something you don't normally do in digital with the red channel, but I think in this case I'm going to do that. Maybe just also make it just a touch brighter. So now that I have that, I can go through, I can do some sharpening. Doesn't really need much, so I'm just going to go to my standard sharpening 50, bring the amount down to 0.9, and I think that's pretty good. I could go through, I could select this area, darken that down, but I don't really think I want to. I think actually having that little bit of reflection there, I think works pretty well. So I think that is my final image. In terms of size, not too bad. Even though we did a pretty heavy crop, we're still almost at 30 megapixels, so still a pretty big image. I could do pretty much whatever I want with that. Here is the photo outside of all of the editing software, so the final product, if you will. And if you look close, you can see there are a couple little spots that probably need a little bit of cleaning up. That's typically what happens with Photoshop. Had I used one of the dedicated focus stacking applications like Helicon Focus, I probably could have picked an algorithm that I wouldn't have had those. But this is actually pretty good. It'd be pretty trivial to clean those couple of things up. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for making it all the way through to the end. If you did like this video, please go ahead and give it a like. And if you'd like to be notified on future videos, go ahead, hit that subscribe button and that little bell, and you'll be notified, I believe via email or something. Not quite sure what, that I have a new video out there. So thanks. Bye.